What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 371 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher, and we are in the middle of the second round. Home team's faring quite well, except for one particular team, the champs. We're going to talk about what we've learned so far in this second round. With me to do so, Drew Dinkmeyer. Dink, how's it going?
It's going well. These series are, for the most part, going the way I expected, with the exception of Denver, Minnesota, which we will talk through at length. Unfortunately, I think one of the kind of topics that's rearing its ugly head throughout these playoff series is how much health kind of impacts things. And we often forget when we look back at champions past, all the different things that sort of may have gone their way along the road. And one of those things is health. Generally, the teams that are left standing at the end of the playoffs have been the healthiest throughout the course of the playoffs, or have had the depth to be able to withstand it. And I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about before we even jump into the series stuff, Mike, is one, the impact and role of health in these playoffs, and then two, the impact of the new CBA. Because I can't help but think we're going to see a lot more one-off champions and a lot fewer dynasty type situations, just because of the way the new CBA is, in terms of making it really, really tough to keep cores together for long periods of time. And that's something that I keep thinking about as I'm watching this Minnesota team, is how incredible they are and how I think they're very, very live to win the title. And also the financial implications of where this team is and how they might need to change it a little bit over the next 2 years, just from a financial perspective. And I think that we saw that with Denver last year, right? They had to let go of Bruce Brown. They could not keep Bruce Brown under any scenario. And so I can't help but think we might be out of the era of teams winning 2 or 3 titles in a row, or in the NBA finals 2 or 3 times in a row, and into an era where there's you got to kind of catch the window perfectly to get 2 or 3, and then kind of reset on the fly. And I think the ultimate test of this will be OKC, who just has all of the picks at their disposal and all the flexibility in the world to try to make this work. But I wanted to kind of start there on the pod. What are your thoughts on how the new CBA and the new rules around the league are going to kind of impact the way we view champions? Because I think in the past we viewed teams or great players that win just one title as they didn't really accomplish that much, or it just seems like those you're not going to have teams like LeBron, Wade, and Bosh with all the depth of the min-price, with Ray Allen and Shane Battier and all the depth of the min-price players. It seems like it's going to be tougher to form those types of teams going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the Wolves are a good example. They have their version of Bruce Brown and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? Think about how many teams would Nickeil Alexander-Walker start on? Half?
Yeah.
Maybe more than half. So that is obviously, if you're paying a starter, the starter money thing is definitely something that's worth noting there. So, and they got him, like, everything just came together. That trade obviously is one thing, but drafting Jaden and just becoming an ultimate superstar in the year they didn't have it. Naz Reid, bottom of the barrel player. There was talk of him getting cut for basically dumped off to Boston when Boston was looking for bigs last year when they had injuries. So they've had that work for them. Mike Conley, we'll see. He's been very, very good and has been able to fit. It's just be tough. So I'm kind of with you there. Maybe Bruce Brown, unless guys take crazy pay cuts. But to your point, OKC could find better contracts with the trick picks they have. The Wolves certainly don't have any picks to do that, where they kind of get off bad money for good money kind of a thing. So yeah, the OKC is probably the only team I would say they're immune to, because they could attach stuff for desirable contracts, every year. But hey, we'll give you this first if you give us this guy for the year, and then keep doing it, because they've got enough of that to kind of cycle through for a couple years. But yeah, definitely some concerns here. It's not like the top 3 players on every team are that much better, I would say. Yeah, it's how do you feel about that? With the old big 3 era, I think the big 3 era is what I'm getting at. It's I feel like the big 3 era is almost kind of gone. It's just hard to build a team that way.
It's certainly gone. I think it's certainly gone from an acquisition standpoint, that you have to go out and acquire your big 3. I think you have to draft them. I think that's
Yep.
that's where OKC is going to have this advantage. It's interesting from OKC's perspective. It's like the CBA worked perfectly for them, some of the changes, right? Because they have all the draft picks in the world. They have these guys under contract. They have all the flexibility. If you go into the luxury tax and you're getting penalized picks and different things like that, they've got all of them to be able to withstand. So the CBA moved in a direction that really helped them in so many ways. You talked about Nikhil Alexander Walker with Minnesota. They're already, I think, 14 or 15 million over the tax line next year
Mm-hmm.
without him. So they're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to retain him. Then do they have to move somebody else as well? Cat's making 53 million next year. Rudy Gobert 46 million. Anthony Edwards 38. Jaden McDaniels 24. Naz Reid 15. Mike Conley 10. Like, is this team going to stay in the tax for a while and incur whatever penalties kind of come with them in terms of roster building? We saw this with the Suns, right? They're at a position where they have no draft picks and they can't add any talent going forward that's above the minimum contract. Like, how are you going to be able to fill out these teams? And it's going to place such an emphasis on nailing your draft picks, which we'll talk about what happened to Denver this year when they traded future picks for this year's picks, and then basically didn't hit on any of those guys for year one. Strother, Hunter Tyson, Jaden Pickett, none of them made
Mm-hmm.
big contributions in year one. And I think that's going to be the interesting part of, like, how do you keep these teams together that are making these runs, and the sustainability of competing for titles, I think, is going to be harder and harder to do under this set of rules. And especially in the West, where there's so many well-run organizations and so many
Mm-hmm.
star players that are good enough to kind of carry organizations, that, like, you're going to have to just hit that pocket in that window perfectly to be able to get one, let alone two or three, which is kind of like the expectation on star players in the past. And with the stars spread out a little bit more, with it making it harder to collect stars and then build around them, I think it's going to be harder. I think you're going to see fewer teams that are able to defend their titles, that are able to continuously make those runs, especially in the Western Conference. The East is
Yeah.
lagging behind from a well-run organization, from a star power standpoint. There's, in terms of, like, players that are good enough to, like, just elevate their team to a championship contender kind of by themselves in the East. We've got, you could probably maybe put Joel in that category, although Joel's health in the playoffs has made it really hard to kind of
Mm-hmm.
put him in that category. You can maybe put Tatum in that category. Hard to say, because we've seen Tatum always playing with really good players around him, so kind of hard to give the evaluation there. And you can put Giannis in that category, but Giannis getting into his 30s now, and then after that, you're hoping maybe Paolo becomes the next guy, and there's a ways to go there, but it's not the same level of Luka and Jokic and Anthony Edwards and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and all these great young pieces that are all in the West. So that's the first thing that struck me, is how thin the margins are going to be for these Western Conference contenders. In this year, we're seeing it, right? Denver is running into this injury issue with Jamal Murray. That, look, if Jamal Murray was fully healthy with the way the Wolves played in game two, I don't know that it would matter. The Wolves were so
Yep.
good defensively in game two, and they're shooting the ball so well from three with their bigs that is allowing them so much floor spacing, that I don't even know if a healthy Jamal Murray matters. But I would have loved to see it. I would have loved to see a Jamal that can get to his spots and explode and get to the paint. Um, and then you're looking around and you see Luka Doncic playing a little bit banged up, and you're seeing a healthy young
Mm-hmm.
OKC team kind of feast around him. It seems like it's a little bit like a National Geographic video, man, where you've got like a limping gazelle out there a little bit, and then there's just a pack of lions ready to attack. In this case, wolves ready to attack on
Mm-hmm.
Denver, and OKC, the Thunder, on Luka. It just makes it so that the margins are so thin, and these young teams are also the ones that are more likely to be healthy. So I think we're seeing a really big turning of the page in terms of the LeBrons, the Kevin Durant's, the Steph Curry's. That torch is obviously being passed, but I think it's even being passed quicker to, it went through Jokic's hands pretty quickly potentially here, and maybe into the really young guys that are surrounded by other elite young players as well. And that's why, man, the Thunder, they seem
Yeah.
inevitable in the next few years to be maybe the one team that can, like, actually sustain a period of kind of a mini dynasty run. But what are your thoughts in terms of how health is impacting these playoffs? It often tends to impact the playoffs.
Yeah, it for sure is. And to your point, you mentioned the Wolves and the Thunder kind of coasting. Besides their kind of youth, Guess what else they have in common? They swept the first round.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that really kind of helps them to keep their game count down. So winning short is like such a huge deal overall. So yeah, it's a big deal, man. And I think Jamal Murray's kind of the poster boy for this right now. The calf thing was a problem mid-series. This was not a lingering thing. Like Mullen said, it was a one-time thing, but he had a knee injury before that. We saw them basically shut him down for 2 weeks or whatever, and then cap him for the week he returned because they want to make sure he's good for the long haul. Is he though? Like taking the calf injury out of it, which we can't do, but just imagine that didn't happen. He was bad before, and he's still missing a ton of
Yeah.
shots. Among the guys with more than 20 possessions on catch and shoot, he's dead last on catch and shoot by a lot. 32.1 EFG. Next closest is 37.5. That's D'Lo. He's missing all his shots. He's not driving as much. His passing hasn't been nearly as good. He's not playing well. And then you add to the fact that he has to deal with the toughest match. We said it going into it. He went from one of the easiest matchups he's ever going to get to one of the hardest matchups he's going to get, probably the hardest. So he has so much working against him. It's clearly frustrating him. Got the 100K fine. That was an
Yep.
issue. And then the Knicks stuff. I mean, that's just like you play your guys 48 minutes. You're playing with fire. OG Anunoby hasn't had a hamstring injury that I tracked all his career. Goes out there, sprints for a layup, pulls his hamstring at the last second, and then limps out. He's probably missing time. We'll talk about that when we get there. And then, like, Luka, you see him shoot the fadeaways, and he's just like not landing on that right knee. He doesn't want to mess with it. Clearly limping around, grimacing. It's been terrible for him. So, yeah, the star player is getting, and then even like kind of down the line, some like low key like secondary players getting dinged up. That's been like Mitch Robinson, another guy. So
Yep.
yeah, we're really feeling it. Kristaps, didn't even mention Kristaps. Really, almost every team.
Yep.
Jared Allen, like,
Jared
just go on
Allen.
down the line here.
The only two teams that we can mention right now that you don't have anything that you're worried about right now: Minnesota, Oklahoma City. Those two teams look great, right? They look incredible out there. They look like the future of the West. They're the healthiest by a
Mhm.
good margin right now. And, Boston just doesn't have much competition in the East to really push them
Yeah.
right now that we've seen. So they're able to kind of afford, and it sounds like Kristaps might even return this series. So, Boston it's going to be interesting to see how much of a benefit that is to Boston, that they're not going to have to go through this
Mhm.
gauntlet of teams in depth. And maybe Minnesota can take care of Denver early, and it won't be that type of gauntlet. But I do think the health is really influencing these playoffs in a big way, and in ways past that we've talked about in the past, where players missing games. I think it's impacting the playoffs more in the players that are playing games, right? Like Joel Embiid played in all the games against the Knicks, but was clearly not 100% Joel Embiid. That influences the outcome of that series. Luka Doncic looks like he's not clearly 100% himself. I think that's
Mhm.
going to influence the outcome of this series against Oklahoma City. Jamal Murray, clearly not himself. And when I say influence the outcome, I don't mean that it would change the result in terms of the winner, but certainly influences the depth of the series, all these different things that could happen. And maybe it does influence the difference in the winner in these. But we're seeing a combination of, obviously, we missed Kawhi Leonard in the opening round as well. We're seeing a combination of players that are missing games in the playoffs, but we're also seeing
Mhm.
a combination of players that are playing through things and really struggling in the playoffs. And all of this, it's a bigger conversation that probably needs some expertise on sports science and health and injury management and prevention and whatnot. But whatever we've been trying to do is not really working effectively in terms of getting our
Mhm.
best players the healthiest in the playoffs. Um, you could say maybe for OKC and Minnesota, they had the benefits of, for OKC especially, like they had a lot of games that they were able to take off at the end of the year for J Dub, for Shea Gilgis Alexander, that were injuries. But maybe that sort of allowed them to be as fresh as possible. For Minnesota, you had Karl Anthony Towns miss time and rehab back, but a lot of the guys who have missed time and rehab back and tried to come back haven't stayed healthy. So it's really hard to say what's going to keep guys healthy in the future, but it's one thing that is definitely influencing these playoffs. With that, I think we can start to get into some of the series talk.
Yeah, I'll just say the amount of like muscle pulls. It's not like guys have like freak accidents where they like, oh my god, they have one bad step. Usually, if you pull your muscle, it's from like overexertion
Yeah.
for period of time and stuff like that. It's the last thing I'll say. So yeah, I think let's go into the Denver series. I think that's kind of the most interesting to talk about. I talked about Jamal Murray. I don't know if we need to add, but let's talk about Jokic really quick. Really struggling with the size. He's shooting 44.7 EFG in the series. That would rank 11th worst among the 84 games. So he's like, bottom 8th percentile from efficiency from a Joker standpoint. The Jamal two-man game, they're taking that out. They're putting so much length and pressure, adding a lot of size. They were trying to run some inverted pick and roll stuff in the last game that wasn't really working. Joker's just doesn't have it. And I mentioned this in game 5 against the Lakers. He just didn't it was like, does he have it? Does he have it? And then, he kind of didn't. Like the other players kind of stepped up. So what's Joker and the two-man game to tie back in? Like, how could you get Jamal cleaner looks? Because they're clearly not working. Like the size from the Wolves is just too much for them right now.
Yeah, I don't have great answers for how they're going to get clean looks for Jamal Murray without his explosiveness. What the big thing, and I do want to stay on the point of Nikola Jokic has been bad. He's been bad. And look, I am one of the biggest Nikola Jokic fans out there, and I believe the guy has consistently elevated his game in the playoffs historically. The last 3 games, he has been bad, including the Game 5 win against the Lakers that we talked about, where he had 7 turnovers. And it's hard to say some guys been bad when the lines have been 25, 20, and 9, 32, 8, and 9, 16, 16, and 8. But he's been bad for his level of play. It has not been up to his level of play. And when you win 3 MVPs, when you put yourself in that elite class, you deserve the criticism when you are not helping elevate your team or kind of take over in big moments. And it's really been since game 3 of the Lakers series that I think we've seen him play well. I think that was the last time we saw him play well, is game 3 of the Lakers series. And this series in particular, I think the big issue that Denver is having from an offensive standpoint is they have no way to pressure the paint effectively right now. And because they have no way to pressure the paint effectively, they're getting a lot of late shot clock contested threes. When they're even getting shots off, they're getting blocked at the rim a ton because of the size. They're getting passes deflected because of the length. And the reason that I think they're unable to pressure the paint is twofold. One, Minnesota's defense is freaking awesome, just unbelievable. And certainly you can point to the change in the way the officiating has had an impact on Minnesota, who's a very, very physical defensive team, because they're able to play freer with their physicality. In the change in officiating, I'm talking back to the middle of the season that we've seen where free throw rates kind of went down historically. I'm not trying to hone in on specific series, but that has allowed them to play free and aggressive in hounding teams. And there's so much length in the paint at all times. We're seeing Naz Reid, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert in the one game that he played, all playing exceptionally well. We're seeing really active hands from Kyle Anderson and Jaden McDaniels in passing lanes. They are just all over the place, and there's nowhere to pressure the paint without the only way you're seeing paint touches for Denver right now is when Jokic is able to back someone down into the paint. And when Jokic is able to back someone down into the paint, Minnesota has figured out the right timing and the right blend of cutting off the passing lanes to Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot that have been so effective for Denver, and just having high hands to challenge and contest Jokic's shots. And so he's having to try a lot of fadeaways and stuff where he's moving away from the basket and a lot of awkward angle stuff that's making him less efficient. And what are ways that Denver has been able to challenge the paint in the past? Historically, they've been able to challenge the paint by back cutting. Guys like Michael Porter, Aaron Gordon have been very effective cutters. Christian Brown, Peyton Watson have been very effective cutters. But the passing lanes are getting clogged up by the length. There's so much wingspan out there. The passing lanes are getting cut off, and then they're kind of just packing the paint and saying, like, score over us at the rim. We're not going to foul you, so you got to score over us and through us at the rim. And it's really, really tough. And then the other ways that they've been able to get in the paint in the past has been Jamal Murray's explosiveness and able to break down defenders. Would he be able to do that if he was fully healthy against Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker? I don't know. That's a really tough matchup. Those guys are great on-ball defenders, but we know he can't do it with a calf. And I think Minnesota knows it. And because Minnesota knows it, they are putting so much pressure on Denver defensively, because they know they've got kind of a haggard, limping, injured player out there, and they are attacking. They are not sitting back defensively. And so you're seeing full court pressure. You're seeing them try to disrupt any rhythm that Denver has. They know that Denver is a very rhythmic offense. So how are they trying to disrupt it? Jokic gets a rebound, somebody's in front of him immediately to try to stop him from getting into a rhythm and getting the ball out of his hands. And you're seeing a lot of uncharacteristic turnovers from Nikola Jokic, a player who has been lauded throughout his career at playing at his own pace and playing at his own speed. He's getting sped up in this series in a way that other teams have not been able to. And so Minnesota is impressive in so many different ways defensively, but I think some of this is allowing them to feel so aggressive and so confident in their defense that they're playing on their toes instead of on their heels, in part because they know Jamal Murray can't beat them. And if they know Jamal Murray can't beat them and break down their defense, who else is getting into the paint without Jokic creating it from a pass or Jokic creating it from himself? Aaron Gordon's not breaking anybody down off the dribble. We saw Aaron Gordon taking a bunch of fadeaways in game 2. Some of the worst shots I've ever seen Denver take and settle for. And that's yeah, he made a few of them, but this is stuff that you don't see Denver take those shots. You don't see Denver take mid-range fadeaways that aren't Jamal Murray or Nikola Jokic. We're seeing Michael Porter can't break down guys off the dribble and get to the paint. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope can't break guys down off the paint. Reggie Jackson, another player who actually has that capability, he gets hurt at the end of last game. So they have no way to pressure the paint. And when they have no way to pressure the paint, Minnesota doesn't have to leave the shooters. And if Minnesota doesn't have to leave the shooters and there's no way to pressure the paint, guess what you're getting? You're either getting a bunch of tough buckets in the paint from Jokic, or you're getting contested threes. That's the shot diet. That is an impossible shot diet to win playoff games off of. So if Denver's going to turn this around, Jokic either has to be unbelievable, they have to have unbelievable shot making, or they have to turn the Wolves over a bunch. Those are the 3 outs for Denver from here on out.
For sure. And to go to Joker really quick, so I dug in like what's happened. The non-dribble shots are killing him. 14.7 EFG on non-dribble shots. That's down from 54.6. So 40 points below is a major, major problem. And so another thing we talked about from game 1, he's like, hey, you got to clone me because all the size out there. So while you were talking, I just pulled up the Brother I Have 47 game that, when Joker dropped 47 against the Jazz. Listen to the names that were on that team. Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, Royce O'Neal, George Niang, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, and Derek Favors. That was a rotation. A little bit different for caliber defenders that could help and get in the way for Joker. So probably not going to be any Brother I Have 47s. Don't want to count the MVP out. But I feel pretty good about my Wolves takes. But any Minnesota offense, I don't think there's much to say about Ant. But I want to talk about Cat. Cat's been awesome. I think 75 true shooting. He's had Gordon on him no matter what they had with or without Gobert. He's like I wrote in matchups that's going to come out tomorrow. He's playing like that big shooting guard again. He ran some ISO stuff. He's spacing the floor really well. He's running really well. He's guarding Joker really well. There was a commentary after the game from Ant and Cat saying like, "Hey, I always wanted to be a defender," and they kind of knew that they had to take the defensive flame up. Cat's been freaking great, man. Like there was a little bit of foul trouble in the Phoenix series, but that closeout game, he was magnificent. Cat's been awesome. Ant is like that. Ant and Brunson are really clearly trying to take the league over here. Do you have any thoughts on those 2 star players and apparently the title run they could make?
Yeah, before we get into the Wolves side, you mentioned the Jokic no dribble stuff. I want to highlight that part of the reason that the Jokic no dribble shooting stuff is so poor is in part, once again, if you think about clean looks, right? Those clean looks are coming when Jamal Murray can break somebody down off the dribble and you get those little pocket passes, you get those floaters, you get those one catch and go shots. Jokic doesn't have those because Murray can't get past anybody. And that's a testament to Minnesota's on-ball defense. That's a indictment on Jamal's health. He can't get past anybody. So if he can't get past anybody, the one catch shots or the catch and shoot shots for Jokic are basically kind of desperation threes, essentially, or stuff that's highly contested in the rim because it's not pulling the help defender away from Jamal. And the help defender's ready to help on Jokic because they don't have to help on Jamal. So the whole thing for Denver's offense, the whole thing has been totally cut out from under its own legs without Jamal Murray's health. And that's really the thing that I want to highlight. On the Minnesota side, in terms of their offense, Man, obviously they're putting Jokic in absolute hell in pick and roll stuff.
Hmm.
Ant is just eating him up, just way too fast, way too athletic to be able to get whatever shot he wants, whether it's at the rim, whether it's uncontested kind of fadeaways in the mid range. He's got all of that in his bag. Um, in terms of Cat, they're getting so much pick and pop stuff that's wide open
Hmm.
because in a lot of ways Aaron Gordon has to be there to sort of help cut off a driving lane for to help Jokic there and help cut off that driving lane for Anthony Edwards when they're running that stuff, that he can't get back out to the 3 point line on Cat and Nas. And so Cat and Nas, these bigs that are shooting 40% from three, good luck. It bends the defense in a way that just makes it really, really tough. And so, I mean, they've got a guy that can get a shot that he's comfortable with at pretty much any time. Anthony Edwards has elevated his game, has shown the ability to back down big defenders. I mean, but anytime he gets somebody that's slightly smaller than him, he is just body, turnaround fade every time. And he's getting separation and clean looks kind of every time. And it's the way that Michael Jordan used to play in the playoffs. And so that's
Hmm.
why people are bringing up these comparisons in terms of early Michael Jordan in his career. It was just body fade away every time, and it was bucket. It was counted every time. You couldn't stop it. And so you have Ant who's able to get whatever he wants, and then you have these bigs that can just shoot over the top. I mean, this is the thing that Michael Porter Jr. adds for the Nuggets from an offensive perspective is he can get a shot at any point in any time in their offense because of the gravity that Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray have normally. It allows Michael Porter Jr. to get good, clean looks. Cat and Nas are getting that same thing, and now there's two of them out there at times,
Yeah.
and that's why, in some ways, even though Rudy Gobert missed last game, in some ways, at least from an offensive perspective, the
Hmm.
lineups that Minnesota was putting out there are unguardable. If those guys are going to shoot
Hmm.
40%, they're unguardable. And from a defensive standpoint, Karl Anthony Towns and Nas Reed did a hell of a job impersonating Rudy Gobert in game two. And if those
Hmm.
guys play at that defensive level, this team is really, really tough. So how do you like? I watched that game too, and I was thinking through all the different teams in the league, and I was like, who would have a decent offensive game against this level of defensive effort that I'm seeing and talent on the floor? And the only team that I thought could maybe crack it is Boston.
Yeah.
And because you have enough guys who can individually break down different components of the defense, this is where Denver is getting tapped out right now a little bit, is they only have two guys who can break down defenses. And Minnesota has one of those guys completely clamped. And because they have that one guy completely clamped, they're able to devote other attention to the other guy, and they're just making life hell on both Jamal and Nikola. Boston has four different guys that can break you down off the
Hmm.
dribble and kind of get into the paint and shoot. And so maybe Boston could give this type of Wolves defense a little bit of trouble. Maybe OKC, but OKC's got too many guys that I think you can kind of clearly help off of. So OKC would have to win by basically out defending them on the other end and turning things
Hmm.
into transition. So this Wolves team, if they play at that level of defense in game two, I think there's only one team in the league that can beat them, and that's Boston.
Yep.
I do not know if they can maintain this level of defense that they just played in game two. That was the
Hmm.
best defensive game I've seen in a long time in the league in terms of the defensive intensity, especially when you consider the quality of offensive team that they were going against. But yeah, the Wolves, man. And offensively, if they can just get as many clean looks for Karl Anthony Towns and Nas Reed as they want on this pick and pop stuff, because the defense has to sort of honor the ability for Anthony Edwards to get to the rim and get wherever he wants in the mid range. Good luck.
Yeah, for sure. And going to the Ant point, he had 12 rim possessions in game two. That's the most he's had in 2 months. Why is that? Going back a couple years, remember when they got the bigs and he wasn't dunking, and I was like, "Oh yeah," and he said, "Oh, you can't get in the lane; it's too clogged up in there." They take Gobert out; he's running the lane all night. Just a couple other stats I wanted to mention on how insane that was. The O rating from Denver, second worst all season, 18.8% on mid ranges, worst they've had all year. 16 assists in game two, fewest they've had all year. And then probably one of the crazier stats, 14 shots with 0 to 4 seconds left on the shot clock. That's a lot of late clock shots, and just a testament to. I mean, there was like 5 or 6 possessions where it's just like put it on tape and it's like if Chris Finch wants to get an extension or Mike Mike Mikanori's getting interviewed. Hey, let's just look at this. Like, okay, you're hired. If you're gonna get your defense to play like that, so yeah, just nuts, man. We'll talk more about it for sure. Anything else? And the Wolves' offense actually really quick. They've been incredible. 123 points per 100. That's first. They're doing everything, man. It's hard not to think this team is the best in the NBA, crushing everyone. And then like even in game one, just they they took control. They Denver. You know, they just got to the end, just smoked them, and blew the
Yep.
doors off them. Anything you want to add to predictions? And anything you want to add to close this series out? Talk.
I mean, they look like a team that is putting kind of the statement that we saw Denver put on the Lakers last year, where it was like, hey, we can take
Mm-hmm.
all your best shots. We're not scared of you, and we're going to put you away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Minnesota looks like to Denver right now. They look like they're just not afraid of Denver in any way, shape, or form, and that
Mm-hmm.
they trust their length, their athleticism, their ability to hound you. And so the only way that I see this series changing for Denver's perspective is some sort of injury on the Minnesota side. That's a way that the
Mm-hmm.
series could change. Or Denver getting Minnesota into foul trouble somehow. That's the only way that I can see having to force Minnesota to play less aggressively defensively. But right now, they haven't been able to do that. Minnesota's got free reign to play as aggressive as they want, and it's just completely mucking up all of Denver's rhythm and offense. And Denver is in a lot of ways they're like a symphony offensively. Like there's a conductor in Jokic, and when the conductor's a little bit thrown off, and you start hearing a horn out of nowhere, and you start like that's basically what you're seeing from the offense. Everything's kind of out of place, and Minnesota's just been able to muck it up. So I hope that the champs can get a game and make this competitive. I think if they can get one of these two, obviously they could maybe win Game 5 at home. I think right now it feels like the best case outcome for Denver is losing in 6. Like that's how dominant the Wolves feel right now between the two.
Mm-hmm. And then one more. Even if it's not Ant who gets injured, obviously don't get hurt, Ant. They're so insulated, it's insane. Conley gets covered. Conley gets hurt. They're covered. They got Nah. Any of the bigs get covered. Any of the bigs get hurt. They got Nas. They got Sloan. We saw him play really well. Jane gets hurt. They got Nah. They're so covered. So and they're like think about the Knicks. The OG minutes we're gonna have to fill when we do if he's out. We are putting in like Alec Burks. We are putting in players who were not in the
Yep.
rotation, and now we're putting in players if someone did go down for the Wolves. They're just chilling. Should mention Boston that they're Luke Cornett, who we'll get to. We won't spend too much time on that, but let's get to the other series. Just an insane, dominating win from Dallas, and so I'm gonna be
From
a little
OKC.
weird here. Okay, yeah, Dallas OKC. Excuse me if I misspoke there. So Dallas was on a huge run in the third quarter. It was like 10-2. They cut the lead to 1. Right. Mark Daigneault calls timeout, pulls out Josh Giddey. First play off the bat, it was like almost like a floppy. It was clearly a design ATO to get Isaiah Joe in the game, run a 3-pointer for him, had a beautiful, clean look right along the line. Couldn't ask for a better shot. Nails it, and then they just absolutely coast. They go 51-30 from that timeout. And Giddey got played off the court, which we could talk about for sure. But just a really impressive win. OKC looks legit. They got kind of like a pretty poor game from J-Dub until the fourth, and then J-Dub just dominates 10 points on 4-4 with 2 threes in the fourth quarter. It just blew the doors off Dallas in a big way. So I guess let's talk about the winners first. We talked about Luka a little bit, but what have you been like? Chet, J-Dub down the stretch, SGA, Isaiah Joe hit some big shots. Casey Wallace's defense is really good. Just down the line, even Jay Will I thought made some good plays. Like down the line, their whole
Yep.
team besides Giddey made a pretty big impact. But what impressed you most about OKC's win in Game 1?
I think a lot of times you talk about the benefits of home teams getting the benefit of role players kind of outperforming expectations, and I think we saw that in a big way, right? I think if you look at what Dallas role player played effectively in game 1, you would say Gafford and you would say Josh Green, and that was really it in terms of the guys. And
Mm-hmm.
on OKC side, you could say Isaiah Joe was super effective, Jay
Mm-hmm.
Lynn Williams, Jay Will was
Yep.
super effective, Aaron Wiggins was fantastic in game 1 and really a difference maker for them in a big way. You just saw more. Casey Wallace was really solid. You just saw kind of more comprehensive contributions from the second unit and the bench and the role players from OKC in game 1 than you saw from Dallas. And I thought similar to what we're talking about with Minnesota disrupting so much of Denver's flow offensively. I felt like Lou Dort is disrupting so much of the
Hmm.
flow for Luka Doncic in terms of where he is able to get to. Some of this is also Luka's health, which again, I like. There's
Hmm.
similarities between these two series in the sense that one of the main engines is a little bit banged up and it's having ramifications that are kind of widespread in terms of the offense. In Denver with Jamal Murray, I think it's more noticeable than what's happening in Dallas simply because Kyrie Irving is a player that on the perimeter can still kind of can create his own looks and whatnot. But you saw like the added defensive attention that other teams had to give Luka in the past allowed Kyrie to roam a little bit more freely. Game one, that wasn't the case. Kyrie had sort of the extra attention on him whenever he got the ball because, in large part, OKC's very comfortable with Lou Dort just being the guy on Luka and just saying like, no, we don't have to help as much off of here. So yeah, I, I I thought OKC was phenomenal in game one, and Shea looked so comfortable. And I think when we broke down the series, and I was saying like this is a really tough one for me to kind of sort through. One of the things I was struggling with was who's going to look more comfortable between the top end players. And as we talked
Hmm.
through it, I just got to the conclusion that hey, like Luka's a little bit dinged up, Dort is a nightmare to deal with, and I feel more confident in Shea feeling more comfortable. And that was the overwhelming feeling that I walked out of game one was OKC's star looks very, very comfortable in this matchup, and Dallas's star looks very uncomfortable, and that's probably going to be the difference here.
Yeah, SGA didn't like fully have it. He got a little bit bailed out by free throws, which were earned. Like he wasn't getting cheapies. Got to the line 13 times, but didn't have his like layup game going. He had two back-breaking step back threes that I thought like pretty much swung the game in the third quarter. But he wasn't great. But he was substantially better than Luca. Luca's 19 points, his second lowest all playoffs. Although only one lower was in the bubble in 2020. He had 13 points in 29 minutes against the Clips. So very uncharacteristic. And then also the pace of this game is up. It was I think 7 points pace faster in this one compared to the Clippers series, and actually Dallas's offense was playing faster because they just had to because they were just getting so clamped in the half court as well. So yeah, there's just so much going on here. I want to talk about Giddy next. So they played Giddy off the court. You saw them put Lively and then sometimes Gafford on him to get him off the court. Well, that backfired. OKC was plus 41 net rating in the non Giddy minutes, 133.0, 92D. Um, yeah, man. Do you like, if you're the Mavs, do you not play Giddy off the court and just do you like kind of give him like a false sense of security? I mean, the non Giddy minutes went like at about as good as you can get.
Yeah, so I don't think you can kind of like afford to try to
Yeah,
sandbag. I
yeah,
think
for
you
sure.
always kind of try to play every minute and trying to win it the best of your
Yeah.
ability. So I think you got to keep with the same kind of approach. Have Gafford on Giddy,
Hmm.
Giddy shoot the ball, and then
Hmm.
honestly, are we gonna see Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe and Case and Wallace play
Hmm.
to that level again? I don't know. I mean, if they do, like
Yeah,
it's over. If those
it's
guys give
over.
those contributions every game in the series, it's over. Move on. Let's see OKC Minnesota
Hmm.
type thing. But yeah, I
Hmm.
think Dallas from a tactical standpoint, I don't think there's much to adjust in terms of how they were handling the Giddy minutes. I think ultimately the big thing for Dallas is they need a lot more help from the secondary players if they're going to have this version of Luca. If
Hmm.
Luca is going to be 75%, 65% or whatever, and he's not able to, you talked about yesterday on our content about how Jalen Brunson has a 37.5 point line, Luka Doncic has a 30.5 point line.
Hmm.
And Luka Doncic was a player that was averaging like 34, 35 during the regular season. So
Hmm.
if he's not able to give his usual, they need to get it from somewhere else. And you look around that roster and it's like, I don't have confidence. Maybe you can piecemeal it together, but I don't have confidence that any one of those role players is going to consistently step up. So they need PJ Washington or Tim Hardaway Jr. or Derrick Jones Jr. to shoot the ball
Hmm.
really effectively. They really, really need the extra shooting. And losing Maxi Kleber hurts there in terms of the
Yep.
ability to generate those extra shots. And one of the things that you're seeing in this game, and I forget which broadcast touched on this so effectively, but a lot of times when you like all these shots for Gafford at the rim and stuff are great in terms of for Dallas generating points and whatnot.
Hmm.
But when Dallas misses something at the rim, watch how quickly it is turned into 2 points by
Yep.
OKC in transition. And this is OKC's whole thing. It's almost like an
Mhm.
elite counter-attacking soccer team that's basically like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, come get your shots at the rim. We'll have Chet try to contest everything. And God forbid, for your sake, if you miss this, we are rebounding the ball and we are out. And especially with Luka, who is not super known for getting back on defense and whatnot, that's one of the big challenges of this series for Dallas is any of those misses at the rim, how quickly they're turning into twos and threes on the other end or really good looks on the other end. And that's where OKC just grinds you down in terms of the pace and the transition. And I think that's where a team like Boston or Minnesota will be more of a test for OKC than they've currently faced because New Orleans had the same issue, right? In terms of like, yes, they're getting stuff at the rim with Joe Val, but anytime they miss, it is a bucket on the other end. And I think Dallas is
Mhm.
going to deal with the same struggles in this series.
Yeah, and then you mentioned going to the injury thing. You touched on it briefly, Maxi Kleba. So I tweeted about it, but nothing screams you miss Maxi Kleba more than when the game is slipping away and you're like, okay, last chance. Who am I going to put out there to close this game out? They go Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr., and Tim Hardaway Jr., who
Yeah.
you would not have had on your bingo card as like their last ditch effort guy. They didn't use that lineup at all during the season. That chess piece, we saw that was their go-to when they would fall behind. Put Maxi in there, he'd hit shots. We saw them have that big comeback that they couldn't pull out when they were down 31. That Maxi Kleba injury, like I know on the preview, I said like what 35, 50 point difference on the line.
Yeah. 50 Cent.
Obviously, that
Yeah.
was a lot. Yeah, but like that's a big deal to me. It's huge. They missed that piece for the way this is going to shape out. It's like
Yeah.
huge to me. So like maybe it was certainly too much to say that, but that's that's going to swing a game, man. Like there's going to be a game where they're just going to grind it out, and they're not going to have enough 3 point shooting or enough defense. They can't have it both ways. Maxi Kleber covers
Right.
both your
That's the
abilities
issue.
to guard a wing and give you spacing. There's nobody else on the whole roster that can do that. So PJ's not reliable shooting anymore. Doesn't rebound. Does he defends pretty well. He actually did a pretty good job, I thought, when he guarded SGA and JDub. But that Maxi Kleber piece is just one of the biggest role player injuries, like bigger than Reggie Jackson. You could argue for this series, it's bigger than Mitchell Robinson. It's a huge deal. Like he is exactly what you call for in this spot.
Yeah, and the name that's going to have to fill that role, if they like, the only name that they have that could potentially fill that role is Dante Exum.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only
Mm-hmm.
guy that they have now. Dante Exum shot 40+
He
percent
didn't
from
play in the
three
second half.
for
They
much of the
cut him
regular
out of the
season.
rotation in the second half.
Right. They cut him out because they were playing from a good bit behind. And when they're playing from a good bit behind, they need Tim Hardaway Jr. They need to hope that like Tim Hardaway Jr. just gets super hot because he can contribute. But the big problem that they're having is I think they could get away with Dante Exum, PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr., Josh Green, and playing those guys a lot if they had Luka
Mm-hmm.
able to create all the offense and all the clean looks for them because those
Mm-hmm.
guys can't create any looks for themselves, right? So Luka and Kyrie got to create all the looks for them because Luka's not able to create as quality of looks for them right now because of his health concerns. I think they're a little bit stuck in where they're like, oh, maybe we need to play Tim Hardaway Jr., somebody who can
Mm-hmm.
catch and dribble and then shoot, right? And this is the slightest of differences and the most subtle of differences. But in playoff basketball, what I'm talking about when I'm saying that Luka isn't able to create stuff as easily for everybody else as before, it's because the help is one step further away than it needed to be before because they're confident in it. And so what happens? That outlet pass that hits somebody in the hands that's ready to shoot, they have one less step of distance, and that one less step of distance forces you to pump fake, dribble aside, and then take a shot. The only Hardaway can do that. Dante Exum is not shooting on the move. Josh Green is not
Mm-hmm.
shooting on the move. Derek Jones Jr. is not shooting on the move. PJ Washington maybe a little bit, but like that's a huge issue. That extra step is a huge issue in terms of what it makes in the playoffs. And so Dante Exum and Derek Jones Jr. These guys catch and shoot like when they're in rhythm, totally
Mm-hmm.
fine. But when that defender is one step closer and it disrupts the rhythm, that totally undercuts the whole offense because they can't. So then they look to pass, right? And then you have to restart the possession again, basically. And so this is like the small differences between playoff basketball and regular season basketball that make a really big difference. And this is why guys like Bob Myers, you've heard talk about like, the the 16 game players and the 82 game players and different things
Hmm.
like that. That's why you need players that can play, it can do all the things, because they're going to be forced to do all the things in the playoffs. And when you're not able to do all the things, you start to get exposed. And right now, I think more of that. And look, I think OKC has guys that are vulnerable to getting exposed too. I just don't think right now Dallas has enough offensive weapons to expose them. They have just two
Hmm.
guys, Luka and Kyrie. When we get deeper into this, when there's more guys out there that can expose you, I think OKC is going to run into some problems. But right now, they can hide those guys pretty comfortably because Luka and Kyrie are the only two guys that can hunt out there, and they can put enough capable defenders out there that they're not gonna uh, get exposed, and they're getting enough offense with Shea being able to get to the line, which we'll see if that keeps up. I mean, he took more free throws than teams are taking in some of these games so far. It was a game that looked like it was officiated very differently than some of the other games we've seen. But yeah, I think right now Dallas looks like they just have fewer chess pieces, and losing that pawn of Maxi Kleber was a big deal.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And should mention Chet. Chet was awesome from a defensive perspective. Certainly lively. I'm sorry, Gafford got to him a little bit, but they got like no rim pressure. The Gafford rim points were like a third of their entire team's output,
Yeah.
which just can't happen for a guy that's usually not that high usage. That was a pretty uncharacteristic. I think he had a higher usage than Kyrie. And he was like 4 points away, usage rate wise, from where Luka was. So yeah, predictions here. I think I said OKC in 6, or may have said 7, but I said OKC win, and then the game
Yeah.
1 OKC parlay hit the
Yeah.
first half of that. So
Yeah.
feeling pretty good there. Any thoughts from you on prediction?
I feel pretty comfortable with OKC right now. I feel
Yeah.
OKC in 5-6. Honestly, I feel pretty
Mhm.
comfortable with them right now. I think it's just going to take Herculean efforts from Luke and Kyrie. And
Yeah.
look, those guys can do it. Those guys can absolutely do it. But to get
Mhm.
4 out of the next 5 of that, or 4 out of the next 6, I should say, of that, going to be a real challenge.
For sure. So let's go to the New York and Indy series. We talked about the injury side. We don't need to hit that again. Sounds like Jalen Brunson's going to be okay. He said after the game he's feeling okay. We saw the Chris Haynes post game comment. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to try," basically. So there's that. There's OG. I think that's a pretty big deal. I do want to talk about. I think the Rick Carlisle comments were pretty interesting to me after the game. Rick Carlisle, by the way, who never bashes the refs. I listened to every Carlisle presser. I saw him get ejected, and I said in our Slack, I was like, "Wow, is Carlisle gonna really bash the refs today?" And he did really hard. They, according to Carlisle, they had 29 plays from Game 1 that they were going to send to the league that were wrong calls. He opted not to send them, but then after Game 2, they did send them. Brian Windhorst noted that they sent 48 plays that they thought were incorrectly called. Obviously, Game 1 was a way bigger deal than Game 2. But to Carlisle's point, the fact that the double dribble call on Hartenstein, which was the right call not to call it, right? But from his perspective, call, Tibbs goes out there, argues, overturned. That looks terrible. So and then you had the big comment, which is kind of a big deal. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but like calling out the market size, that has to make the NBA real mad. Like you don't want to hear big
Yeah.
market versus small market. NBA really cares about the integrity of the game. Teams aren't treated unfairly, yada yada yada. But what are your impressions on like all this ref talk and Carlisle? Again, if I had to pick up a coach who would be most least likely to bash the refs and like be possibly getting a fine, Carlisle at the top of the list, not even close. But thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I stated earlier that I just hate it. I hate all of the
Yeah.
focus on the officiating. Um, Yeah, I don't enjoy participating in. All the Knicks fans who early in the series I saw on Twitter, my friends complaining about the officiating in the Philadelphia game. I'm wondering how they're feeling now.
Hmm.
That's why I think it's all stupid. I think, yeah, sometimes it
Hmm.
works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't work in your favor, and it's just like the nature of dealing with human beings trying to call a sport that's moving really fast and really physical and really challenging. I do think
Hmm.
the Pacers are a team that are more vulnerable to games being called in a way that can hurt them because they're not physical. They're not physical. They
Hmm.
don't take the game to you. And as a result, if you're playing a team that is really physical and is really taking the game to you in a great degree, the officiating is going to impact that. Whether they're officiating things really tightly and calling a lot of fouls, that would benefit Indiana in a big way because they're not that physical. They're not kind of getting in your shirt. And if things are being let go and it's being called with a looser whistle. I think that's really bad for Indiana in a lot of
Mhm.
different ways
Mhm.
because they're not playing that way defensively. So you know, I think it's unfortunate if that's the route that Rick Carlisle is going to take in terms of the league. If you I think you just have to adjust to the way the games are being officiated. And if you don't have different ways to adjust because your roster is limited or because your players are limited, I think that's one of the reasons that you're not a championship contender. And honestly,
Mhm.
like the Indiana Pacers, I get you might be frustrated with the calls and whatnot. You are running as hot as anyone could ever possibly run in terms of dealing with opponents getting injuries in these series. You are not
Mhm.
a team that can win a first round playoff series without other teams losing all their guys. You're not that good.
Mhm.
So like you lost a quarter and a half of Brunson, you were able to dominate there, and then as
Mhm.
soon as Brunson got back, they lose OG Anunoby, and you still got whooped in the second half. And so like yeah,
Mhm.
we can complain about the officiating and whatnot, but like man, everything is working in your favor to even be here. So I don't want to be like be grateful that you're even here, but like honestly, they're not that good. And so I get it that they need the officiating to be probably neutral or working in their favor to have a shot because they're not that good. They don't have any margin for error to win this
Yeah.
series. So it just frustrates me from that perspective. Would like a little bit more introspection on his point of like, okay, you're what about your accountability for taking out TJ McConnell in the fourth quarter and letting
Yep.
Nembhard continue to get burned over and over again when TJ McConnell is the only guy that's disrupting Brunson in any way, shape, or form? Like, I don't know. I'm just more about personal accountability than complaining about outside situations.
For sure. So we could talk about that. After the game, Rick Carlisle said that McConnell had, quote, played a pretty good chunk of minutes and he considered using him, but he thought he trusted his starters and Nemhard is their best on ball defender. Well, I don't know about that. Have you watched the last two games, Rick? He has not been
Yeah,
your on ball defender. So yeah, go ahead.
yeah. It's unbelievable to me. I get it. Nembhard is a
Yeah.
better defender generally than TJ McConnell, but he is
Mhm.
completely getting worked over by Jalen Brunson every time.
Mhm.
Jalen's getting anything he wants at any point against Nembhard. And so sometimes you've got guys who are your best defenders and they're really good defenders, and another guy just has their number. And to me, like that was pretty clear watching, the first two games is that Nembhard
Yeah.
just, and it was kind of clear, honestly, in the first few games of the Milwaukee series until Dame got hurt. And so, like, this guy who's your best defender is kind of getting lit up by all the other guards. Maybe try something else.
Yeah. And just to kind of keeping with the McConnell thing, you can make a case that all the second unit players outplayed the first unit players. Like we talked about TJ and Nemhard. Obviously, you could talk about Halliburton, which we could talk about. Ben Shepard outplayed Aaron Nesmith by a ton. And then
Yep.
you could make a case Obi Toppin outplayed Pascal Siakam. Siakam's been bad. We could talk about that more. And then Isaiah Jackson played really well in this series. Game one, he was terrific. Miles Turner has been a disaster on defense. Missed some shots. He played terribly. Like their whole second unit outplayed their whole first unit besides Halliburton. Anything you want to add there, and then we can kind of pivot into Halliburton being aggressive after the 11.4 usage rate in game one again.
I think it's just got to be devastating, obviously, to have the role players play so well on the road and have your hands in those games where you can win those games and feel like you've got leads that you can salt away and you come out down 0-2. That's got to be devastating. I'm sure that's part of the
Mm-hmm.
reason that Rick Carlisle is sending all these clips to the refs and whatnot and feels like are sending all these clips to the league about the refs and like because it's got to be super tilting to have your role players play that effectively and still not be enough. Um, I do want to stress some things since I'm probably being pretty hard on Carlisle here that I think he's doing that are really smart and really effective. I think the full court press is really smart against a New York Knicks team that has to play all their guys 48 minutes. It's like if you're going to play your guys 48, we're going to make it 48 minutes of hell out here, and we're going to hound them kind of the whole way through and try to be aggressive in terms of our schemes. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think they got to stop trying to do the traps and doubles so high. That's just opening up so much
Mm-hmm.
passing room for Hardenstein. And Hardenstein's ability as a passer was really on display in game two. He
Man.
was fantastic. You can't trap and blitz so high on Jalen because it's just giving Hardenstein so much room. I think you got to bring those traps and those blitzes and those hedges closer to the 3 point line and really kind of muck up the space a little bit. But I think in general, some of the adjustments in terms of full court pressing and also trying to be more aggressive putting 2 on the ball against Brunson are things that are smart adjustments to be able to make. So I do want to give credit where credit's due there for Indiana. But yeah, the role players have been great. TJ's been great. Obi's been fantastic. Isaiah Jackson's been good, and Ben Shepherd's been good. And that's unusual to get those performances on the road. It sucks for Indiana to come away with nothing to show for it when you get those.
Yeah, for sure. And then what about Halliburton? He had the comments after game one saying,
Yep.
"Hey, it's a Halliburton issue, not a Knicks issue." Comes out firing. What I think he had 22 in the first half, something
Yeah.
like that, or 19. So yeah, he had the foot on the gas the whole game. Step back game was strong. Was
Well,
left open off ball
Well,
defense.
the
Go ahead.
full game, that's where I'd be critical is Halliburton was not aggressive in that third, fourth quarter to me. Like
Yeah.
the aggressiveness that he showed in the first half was, yes, this is what you need to do, Tyrese. Like you need to go win your team a
Mhm.
playoff game. You need this level of aggressiveness. And it sort of faded in the second half in terms of
Mhm.
the number of shots he took, in terms of his own self creation. Part of that was once OG Anunoby got hurt, it was easier for Pascal to attack. So that was part of it,
Mhm.
is that they were a little bit more comfortable getting Pascal shots there. But I think they're going to need a very, very aggressive Tyrese Halliburton from an offensive perspective to be able
Mhm.
to compete in this series. And I think we saw that in the first half, and he was exceptional. And I think we got to see that for 4 full quarters for him. I think we got to see these games
Yeah.
where like Tyrese can go and put up 40. And I think with some of these guys, it's a mentality thing that it takes time. I think this happened with Jokic a little bit early in his playoff runs as well, because he's a player that thinks about getting others involved. And he was like
Mhm.
pretty content to go out there and have his 25 to 30 and like try to get everybody else involved. But sometimes in the playoffs, you need to go get your 40. And I
Mhm.
think that's the next level for Tyrese that I think he needs to experience. And I thought the first half was a good first step in that direction, but I thought he got a little bit more reserved in the second half.
Yeah. And just all back to the Nemhard McConnell point. Can they get away with Nemhard and McConnell and Halliburton, and like you're cutting out Neesmith's been really bad for
Yep.
multiple games in the playoffs. He had a couple nice highlights, the dunk, yada yada yada. But now that the Knicks are going to play a little bit bigger now, assuming OG misses time, is that like a viable closing lineup against the three guards they have? And then will they close with Precious? Will they close with Deuce? I think it
Yeah.
could play small. Do you have any thoughts on how the TJ McConnell with Nemhard thing could go?
I think Indiana. So I said this from the start. I think Indiana, the smaller the better for them this series, because I think they need to
Mhm.
play fast, and I think they need to play aggressive defensively. Um, with backcourt pressure. And so I think the smaller, the more versatile that they can be, the more that they can try to get body blows on the Knicks by trying to speed them up, make them feel
Mhm.
the 48 minutes that they're playing. I think they need to do that more. So these lineups that like could be, the problem obviously is the rebounding. And that is what came
Mhm.
up big at the end of this game as
Like,
well, is New
every
York
game.
just is so good late fourth quarter situations at going out and competing and getting offensive rebounds. And it seems like you just can't tire them out. It seems like Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart have just an everlasting battery to be able to go in and try to get big offensive rebounds and really compete down there. And if I'm Indiana, that's the one thing that I don't think you have a good answer for, regardless of how big you play. Um, I think in some ways, I think you got to try to wear these guys down throughout the game by just playing faster and faster and faster, and hope that they wear down. But so far, it has
Yeah.
not been the case. Maybe without OG Anunoby, who is able to slow the
Yeah.
pace of offensive possessions down with his defense, maybe Indiana is able to have cleaner routes to doing that. But the Knicks are getting thin, man. This is getting really, really thin. And even though
Mhm.
they're up 2-0 in the series, I told you guys last night I thought it was a good opportunity to take some risk off the table with all those Knicks alts that we bet, because if this Brunson foot thing kind of comes, we've seen enough with Jamal, with Luca. If something is lingering, it can be a bigger deal than you think it is originally, even though
Mhm.
Jalen looked great in that second half. And so I think it's a reasonable time to take some risk off the table if you want to, with
Yeah.
some of the Knicks alts, and play from ahead here, and get some Indiana plus 1.5, some Indiana plus 2.5 stuff, and kind of smooth out those positions a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk more about what to do with that OG in the content here coming up. But so you think it's still Knicks in 5, Knicks in 6, Knicks in 7 with the
Yeah, I
Indians?
I think it's probably Knicks in 6,
Mm.
but maybe 5. I mean, look,
Yeah.
if if they get if they get one in Indy, I think they probably will close it in New York. But I think
Yep.
Indiana is going to play well the next 2 games, and
They've won all their
usually,
home games.
yeah, and usually when you get this very public response to referees, usually you get a little bit more of a favorable whistle the next game.
Mm-hmm.
The whiners usually get paid off in this instance, which I don't
Mhm.
love, but I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana got a little bit more of a favorable whistle on their end, and the home court advantage, the Knicks being, a little bit more impacted by injuries. I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana played really, really well in game 3.
Mhm. Yeah, they've been really, really strong in their home games in the first series. So I expect them to come out. Like you said, I'm probably expecting a split. So I think Knicks, even without OG, could probably get this in 5. But man, if they don't have OG for the next round, oh boy, it could
Good,
be really
good
ugly. That
night.
is extremely important
Yeah.
piece to have against Boston. So which might be good night anyways. Which I guess we could transition to Boston briefly. Man, Derek White. I mean, the guy is the best half court player in the postseason by like a wide margin. Jaylen Brown's been magnificent, just torched Isaac Okoro. But it was actually a lot of like transition and a lot of just like off. It was a lot of like offense scheme, and like he was set up for success in a tough matchup. Jason Tatum, I'll talk just really quick. His shot selection's great. He's got more like rim shots, more like catch and shoot stuff. That's all up. He's just like missing all that stuff. So I think Tatum bounces back. I don't think there's much to say. It's just a matter of like, we just found out while we're recording, Jared Allen wasn't at shoot around, so he's probably missing again. Like basically, is it 4 or 5 games? Is kind of where I come down here.
Yeah, I mean, I watched this series, and I'm just like, this isn't playoff basketball. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not. This is a regular season game. They're like, okay, cool. Cleveland, you were able to score like 55 points in the first half, and everything was like fluid and whatnot. That's great. Like, congratulations. You lose by 20. Like, there's it's not competitive. The intensity is not there. In a lot of ways, it feels like it just felt like regular season basketball to me. Game 1, it felt like Cleveland was kind of going through the motions. I don't know if it's a letdown after coming through in Game 7. It felt like they enjoyed the ability to be a little bit freer moving and play at a pace
Mhm.
that was like a little bit more pickup-y, but it felt like they got suckered into playing Boston's game doing that. And so it just, to me, it didn't feel like playoff basketball. It felt like a regular season Tuesday night game on TNT. Like, I was not particularly impressed. And yeah, they are obviously outmanned and they're outgunned, and I don't think they have ways to make Boston feel them in any way. Like, Miami at least was going to try to make Boston feel them in terms of their competition on the defensive side, but they were obviously outmanned talent wise. Cleveland just doesn't rise up to make people feel them defensively to me in the playoffs. They're just kind of, they're there and they're talented and they have some talented defenders, but you never feel like, oh, they're overwhelming, they're suffocating. I mean, good. I've never felt a team more watching on the couch than Minnesota in Game 2 against Denver, when like six
Yeah.
shots in a row are getting blocked, and then there's steals, and you're just like, my God, you feel like it's children playing against adults out there. Like,
Hmm.
I'm feeling the frustration for Denver of like, they can't even get a shot up. I never feel like that for Cleveland, ever. I never feel like
Yeah.
they're imposing their defensive will on a team that's like making them feel the pressure in any way, shape, or form. And so, like, you know, get this series over with as quickly as possible. I'm uninterested.
Yeah, they got a good game out of Donovan, okay game out of Mobley, nothing out of Max Strus, really very little out of Garland, who's getting attacked defensively. Like as great as Minnesota's defense is, that's how great Boston's offense looks. They are getting nothing contested. There's just nothing, and with Tatum ice cold. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is honestly over in 4. I'd be pretty surprised if the Cavs. I just don't think they could generate that one game. Miami got all those 3 pointers off. I think Boston's going into these games when they're like so much more talent laden. They're like, okay, just don't let them pop off threes against us. But the Cavs don't really have that in them. They're not a big. I think they're 20th in catch and shoot rate. It's just not good. So yeah, this is over. Sorry, Cavs, but nice first round win you got there. And losing on purpose to take on Boston, a real smart decision in the second round. But anyways, anything else you want to mention to get us out of here?
As always, if you are listening to this podcast on your podcast network, iTunes, Spotify, wherever it is, leave a rating and review. We'd love the support that way. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, Established Run NBA YouTube, we are in pursuit of 5,000 subscribers by the end of the calendar NBA season and would love your help in getting there. We're just like 60, 70 subscribers short. So every person kind of counts in terms of helping us get our goals. Make Taylor and Adam and the management crew proud of us. So help us reach our goals by getting to 5,000 there. If you're interested in any of our premium content, you can check out establishedrun.com/subscribe-MBA for all the premium product details on both the DFS side and the prop side. And just really appreciate all your guys' support out there. So thank you for listening. Thank you for enjoying the playoffs alongside us for the ride. We love having an audience to be able to communicate with, and just really appreciate all you guys out there.
Yep, should be a fun little weekend coming up here. Maybe on Monday we have a series over if somehow the Knicks or Wolves pull the sweep off. But excited for the weekend basketball. Appreciate you guys, and we'll catch you guys next time.